I rise in opposition to the amendment. What this stabilizing brace, which is depicted here, when attached here, it turns this weapon into an automatic weapon. It becomes a bump stock. And so it will allow that to essentially be fired like an automatic weapon. That's the danger of it. So I have to very strongly oppose the amendment. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition?
I seek
For what
recognition.
purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
The Democrats are so zealous in their rush to ban everything related to guns and every gun that exists that I'm afraid Mr. Cicilline has his gun features mixed up. He just described the arm brace, which is used by people who have a handicap to help fire a pistol. He just described it as a bump stock. It's neither a stock nor a bump stock. And I think it's important that if you're going to ban these things, that you actually understand what you're banning. That is the picture that he showed, everybody needs to know, is not a bump stock. It's an arm brace for firing a pistol from the wrist. And it's not made to increase the rate of fire of the firearm. It's not made to simulate automatic fire. It's made to stabilize the grip of a pistol. We can look over on the other side of the aisle. Hopefully they figured out what they're trying to ban. Ms. Fishbach is not trying to get an exception for bump stocks. She's trying to help the handicap and make sure that the Democrats are not banning an arm brace, which does nothing to accelerate the rate of fire of the firearm. I think they've confused it with page 3, section C of their bill. And I urge adoption of her amendment, and I hope when the Democrats figure out what it does and it benefits the handicap that they will accept it.
I've had a lot of experience, and of course, working with gun safety experts and gun violence prevention organizations over the years, and I understand very, very well what this does, what this brace does. And that's the reason why we had a piece of legislation that would effectively ban bump stocks. And so what you're determining here is that you're trying to substitute using this piece here, that arm brace, as a means of saying that for individuals that have disabilities, this gives them more stability to be able to use the gun. But in fact, it can actually be used to help facilitate the weapon as a bump stock. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and relinquish the rest of my time to Representative Cicilline to explain even further. But there again, we need to reject this amendment simply because there's no way to differentiate the person that actually buys this stabilizing device, whether or not they really are disabled, or they might actually use it to accessorize that gun as an assault weapon.
This stabilizing brace, when coupled with a buffer tube, operates as a bump stock. Bump stocks are prohibited in this legislation for all the obvious reasons. This is attempting to exploit a design flaw for persons with disabilities and use it to convert this into a bump stock, which will obviously make the weapon increasingly dangerous and easier for someone to fire. That's the reason this amendment should be defeated.
They've showed us a pistol brace. It is not a bump stock. It has never once on this planet ever been used to accelerate the rate of fire or simulate rapid fire. That's not what it does. A bump stock is a stock in which the firearm is allowed to move horizontally within the stock. And then the user can adjust the compliance of their finger. It's still firing one round with every pull of the finger, but the fact they're using the dynamics of the firearm to help accommodate that pull quicker than they might do otherwise. But what he's showing us here is not a bump stock. Okay, do you concede that? Have you conceded
a bump stock.
Yet? Yes, but your picture is not a bump stock. Her amendment does not, reclaiming my time, her amendment has nothing to do with the bump stock. That can't even function in your wildest fantasies as a bump stock. It doesn't work that way. These are two different stocks. One's a stock and one's a brace.
Time of the gentleman has expired. I recognize myself and yield to Mrs. Cicilline.
It's functioning as a bump stock because it's replacing the butt of the gun. It's operating as a bump stock. That's the functional result of it. And
The
I yield back,
gentleman
Mr.
yield?
Chair.
What does the gentleman think a bump stock does? Would the Democrats be amenable to offering the gentlewoman's amendment if and when they find out that that's not a bump stock? Like if they could use Wikipedia or a picture or something here really quickly to understand that what she's offering has nothing to do with the bump stock, and it's only to do with stabilizing the grip and the grasp of a pistol for somebody who isn't otherwise able to do that. Would they be amenable? Would anybody over there be amenable if they found out, and you will eventually, the internet's going to help you here in about 5 minutes, because you're going to be famous. So the sooner you recognize that's not a bump stock, the better off we'll all be. But is anybody over there amenable to accepting her amendment if you do in fact find out that it's not a bump stock and her amendment has nothing to do with the bump stock?
The gentleman will
I'll
yield.
yield to Mr. Cicilline.
Yeah, no one, I don't know if you have not listened, but no one has said it is a bump stock. But what we are saying is it harnesses the semi-automatic fire's recoil, and it operates like a bump stock because subsequent shots are then occur in rapid succession. That's exactly what a bump stock does. Those two features together create the same conditions. So if there were a way to ensure that only that shoulder piece was available to only persons with disabilities, that would be a different issue, but there's no way to ensure that.
Reclaiming my time, I yield to the gentleman from Kentucky.
Yeah, it seems like, so maybe you've conceded that brace isn't what's providing the dynamic motion, and you've somehow fixated on the buffer tube and the buffer and the spring that are contained therein. But
Mr. Cicilline,
Okay.
it's my time, and I've yielded to the gentleman from Kentucky.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio. That buffer tube and the buffer and the spring that's contained within is a feature of every one of those firearms. Every AR-15 style firearm has a buffer tube, a spring, and a buffer inside of it, and they do not facilitate any kind of more rapid fire than a semi-automatic, because every semi-automatic AR-15 has a buffer tube and a spring and a buffer inside of it. I've disassembled them, reassembled them. It's not some trick, it's not some gimmick, it's not a bump stock. And when you combine the buffer tube and the spring and the buffer inside of it with the brace that would allow somebody who's handicapped to fire that from the wrist, you're not creating a bump stock. And I'll yield back to the gentleman from Ohio. If he wants to yield to Mr. Cicilline, I urge him to get Wikipedia up as soon as possible. The internet is about to educate him.